Okay.
My name is Kathy. I'm an alcoholic, and we are picking up on page 11, paragraph 3, and we are in Bill's story. And I'm going to do some reading, and Haron's going to do some commenting. So let's begin. Before my friend, I beg your pardon, but my friend sat before me, and he made the point declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had made complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known.
Okay, let's talk about that a bit. Um, his friend obviously is Ebby Thatcher. And Ebby had come over, and Ebby was sober, which was remarkable to Bill. Ebby was the worst alcoholic Bill ever met. And here he is with 3 months sobriety, and he's telling Bill how he got sober through this first century Christian fellowship called the Oxford Group, even though we didn't put that in the book, not in the first editions at least. Um, through the Oxford groups, and they had these spiritual activities that if you went through them, and they sounded very much like our steps, and we'll talk about that in a moment. If you did that, you can achieve absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. And you could have a spiritual experience, and in Ebby's case, never have to drink again. And Bill Ebby is saying, "Look at me, Bill. I've turned my will and my life over, and I haven't had a drink in months." And Bill is listening to this, but every time Ebby talks about anything relating to God, Bill tunes out. He said what Kathy read, God had done for him what he couldn't do for himself. His human will had failed. Human will is just another example of in, uh, um, inadequate, um,
Higher power,
higher power. Um, I thought there was
self-reliance.
more than, I'm sorry, I'm blanking out, but an inadequate, insufficient, there it is, inadequate, insufficient higher power. Doctors pronounced him incurable. They were about to lock him up, but he admitted complete defeat. So he took step one. This is Bill's taking step one. And he says he's been raised from the dead, suddenly swept up from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. That's a promise. And you may want to highlight that in pink because it is a promise of working the steps. And Kathy, you can continue if you like.
Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There'd be no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all.
So Bill is beginning his awareness of step two. We didn't call it step two. He's basically accepting an awareness of a higher power. Um, Bill was raised by his maternal grandfather, who really rejected the organized religions of the area. But he was a deeply, deeply spiritual man. But just as deeply as he believed in his God, he believed in his right to determine what that God was and how to worship that God and what prayers to use, and everything else was personal, personal, personal. It wasn't dictated by the local church or the local minister. There's a story going around that the minister of that particular church also happened to be the butcher in the town. And he was known when he was cutting meat to put his finger on the scale. And Bill's grandfather did not like that because that was cheating, that was dishonest. So he had a bitch against the minister as it was. But this is what we're talking about. Ebby is talking about references to God, and Bill is kind of thinking, all right, there might be this power, but I don't know about the rest of it, and you'll see why in a moment.
Right. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings.
Yes, he did. Okay. Here was something at work in the human heart, which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles. Let's define miracles. A miracle is an event or an action which indicates divine intervention in human affairs. So, an event or action which demonstrates divine intervention in human affairs. In other words, a God moment. God shows up. At the end of every day, before I put my head on the pillow, I always ask myself, where did I see God today? Or a statement, I saw God today in, and that's what we're talking about. Having seen that power, and he's telling us where it is in the human heart. We're not even on page 55 where he breaks it to us about exactly where it is. He's telling us here a little bit of a hint that it's in the human heart. And here are the miracles right opposite him. He's talking about Ebby, Ebby's ability to get through to Bill. Um, did I give you? No. All right, we'll continue with that. I don't need to go beyond that at this moment. He just shouted great tidings. In other words, Ebby was the example, the proof that Bill needed. Bill told a story about he was deep in a cave, and everybody in his world was outside that cave shouting at him, "Come out, Bill! Come out, Bill!" Whether it was Lois or it was his brother in law, everyone's telling him to come out. But Ebby, having been a recent dweller of that same cave, could walk in, take Bill by the hand, and escort him out like nobody else could because he was the example that he was saying he was. There's no stories about it. Ebby's saying, this is what happened to me, and Bill is seeing that he's making it available to him.
Okay. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped new soil.
Ah, I heard someone say, when your roots are right, your fruits will be right. When the roots are right, your fruits will be right. Because our roots determine our fruits. The roots give life to the plant. And he's seeing that Ebby is a little bit on different footing. Now, I'm going to take a departure for a moment and let me see if we can put up 123, if you don't mind. Rob, thoughts on why don't you choose your own concept? And if you want copies of any of these things that we put up, just drop me a line at thebigbookstudy@aol.com and I'll send it to you. Most of you have been through the workshops already and have seen these, but if you didn't, just let me know and I'll send it to you. Rob, do you have 123?
I do, Howard, and I'm having trouble with bringing it up, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. You know what? But hang on. Part of it is narration anyway. Let's do this. Before we go into the reading, let's set the scene. Let's review the scene here. Bill is by now quite drunk. He said Ebby's been talking for hours, and the whole time Ebby's drinking, Bill is pulling on the bottle. So he's been drinking during the course of a several hour long conversation with Ebby. And Ebby, who had gotten involved with the Oxford groups, this Christian fellowship, was using a lot of religious terminology. And like many newcomers, we know those newcomers who come into recovery, they are on fire. They can't wait to tell you everything that's going on in their life. And if, I don't know about you, but those are the people I can't get far enough away from once they get to me in a meeting. They are murder. They just want to tell you every little detail that's going on in your life. And that's what's going on with Ebby. So they're arguing back and forth and back and forth. And Bill essentially says, Look, I don't want any more. No more religious crap. I believe in some sort of spirit of the universe, but none of this other stuff. Abby, you got to stop with that. But Bill must feel somewhat confused, somewhat torn, because Abby was 2 months sober. So here was living, breathing proof of something greater, some spiritual power that had worked in Ebby's life. And whether Bill liked it or not, Ebby was undeniable proof of what he was claiming. So after all of this debating, Ebby must have been pretty frustrated as well and worn out. And according to what Bill wrote on this page, that exasperation, Ebby's exasperation, gave birth to a concept that has altered the lives of millions. But did Ebby actually say those things? Probably not. Probably not. Let me read a little bit, and I'm going to make a suggestion. After the paragraph that Kathy just read, his roots grasp new soil, I'm going to suggest you put a line across the page under that paragraph. So we are putting a line across where it says grasp new soil all the way across. And then I'm going to suggest you go down to paragraph 5, which is thus was I convinced. Put a line across the page above that. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs blocked in. Let me read it and let me propose something to you. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice, meaning what was left of his old prejudice was still there. The word God aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such concepts as creative intelligence, universal mind, spirit of nature, all these other things, boss universal, brotherhood of man, all of the terms that we've been reading the last few pages. But he says, I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. Out of that exasperation and frustration and dealing with this clown who's 3/4 drunk, Ebby said the following. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Please highlight and underline that. Why don't you choose your own conception of God? Let me continue, and then we're going to come back. That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I'd lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. You may want to make a note there that Ebby let the light in. If Bill is saying he's standing in the sunlight, it's because Ebby Thatcher just let the light in by telling him, choose your own conception of God. Not what I tell you, not what anybody else tells you. Choose your own conception. And he says it was only a matter of being willing. You may want to underline that being willing. In fact, you may want to highlight this whole paragraph. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Step 2. That's all he had to do at this point. And you may want to underline nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. Step 2. Just be willing to believe. That's all. You don't have to believe. You don't have to have faith. You have to believe. And you know what belief is hope. And we all come here with hope. If not, we wouldn't come in the front door of a meeting room. So whether you recognize it or not, what brought you here is hope. And we all have that. And that's all that was needed for step 2. I saw that growth could start at that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I would build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Now, underneath that line is a line, underneath what I just read is a line that goes across the page. There's another line towards the top of the page before the paragraph that says, despite the living example. You see those 3 or 4 paragraphs? They were not in the original manuscript. Do you think this would have been a different book if the line, why don't you choose your own conception of God, was not included in the book? I don't think we'd be here today. I wouldn't. That's what got my attention. You mean I could do that? I have the freedom? How liberating that is, how cathartic that is, that I could choose a God of my understanding. I don't even have to call him God. I can call him Waldo. I can call him anything I want. But imagine this book without these 3 or 4 paragraphs. And I'll show you the proof of what I'm talking about. Rob, did you manage to get that page up?
No, sir, I was not. I tried to send it to Maureen to see if she could get it up. So
Okay.
there we go.
Get it
Thanks,
done.
Maureen.
Thank you, Maureen. Go to the next page if you would. Okay, stop. This is what it originally looked like. The top of the page, we read, I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped new soil. That's where it ended. And then the next paragraph was, thus was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. We haven't read that part yet, but we will. But at long last, I felt, I believed, scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. And you'll notice on the left side is a question mark and the word, the abbreviation for insert number 1. Hank Parkhurst realized that there's something missing between these 2 paragraphs. So if you go to the next page, please, you'll see his notes. Insert number 1. What's the first one? Despite the living example, my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. All the way down, go down to the bottom of the page and look what we find. Underlined. Why don't you choose your own conception of God? This is Hank Parkhurst writing to Bill. And go on to the next paragraph. That statement hit me hard. And it was only a matter of being willing. There's the second part. It's underlined. Only being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required. Exactly what is now in the book was handwritten by Hank to tell Bill, to remind Bill, really, what he needed to include here. Now, let's go back to the first page, if you would, Maureen. The first page you just had up. There we go. Let's go to, but did Ebby actually say this? Okay, think about it. Bill was a salesman. Bill was a promoter. In those early days, when someone would sobriety would speak at an open meeting, you know what they would call it? A pitch, a sales pitch. They didn't say he was sharing his story. He would get up in front of a room of prospects and newcomers and give a pitch. He's selling a program. And as Bill states in the original manuscript of how it works, and we'll see it soon, the book was designed to sell certain pertinent ideas. That was in the original manuscript, that this has been designed to sell you certain ideas, A, B, and C. The point that Bill was trying to sell something should always be kept in mind. When he was interviewed later, Ebby said he had no recollection of making that suggestion to Bill, none whatsoever. He said from the earliest days that the proposal would have represented a major deviation from the Oxford Group's message of belief and reliance on Christ. They were teaching about Christ. They weren't teaching about God as you understand him. So the last thing Ebby would have done is made that kind of suggestions. So as for Bill's recollection, let's remember, by his own admission, he was teetering on the edge of alcoholic insanity, therefore most unreliable of narrators. Now, between Ebby's visit and the time the book was written, Bill formulated some very clear-cut ideas about what alcoholics would and would not sign on to. The Akronites were having tremendous success with a very Christian approach. They followed the Oxford groups, and they seemed content to keep their ties with the Oxford group. Wilson, the visionary, knew better. He was committed to a non-Christian book and a more open-ended choose for yourself type of spirituality. This being very reminiscent of what he was taught by the man who raised him. Remember, Grandfather Gardner Griffiths said his contempt of some church folk and his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. That's who raised Bill Wilson. A man who said, have a concept of your own. His quest to sell these ideas was aided by the burgeoning membership in Cleveland, whose sobriety czar, Clarence Snyder, strongly supported the split from the Oxford groups. So you had Akron that wanted Oxford, New York that wanted nothing to do with God, and the hero of our story, in a sense, Clarence Snyder, came in and kind of tilted the scale in the direction of what Bill was wanted to do. So the mind-blowing, gate-widening suggestion, why don't you choose your own conception of God, almost certainly came from the mind of Bill Wilson, not the mouth of Ebby Thatcher. You can take that down. Now just think about that for a minute. What if those paragraphs were not in this book? Do you think we'd be here today? I sure as hell don't. Think about it. And why did Bill give Ebby credit? Because Bill was very conscious of this hero worship that was already happening in this burgeoning fellowship, with people constantly telling him, Bill, Mr. Wilson, you saved my life, you this, that, you that, and the other thing, and on and on. And Bill knew his problem with his ego. And he knew that if that kept being fed day after day, year after year, he was in for trouble. So he liked to give credit to others for things that he came up with. And in this case, the motherlode, the absolute motherlode, one of the most important, if not the most important line in this book, Bill gave away to Ebby Thatcher. How's that? All right, you want to continue?
This was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view.
Let's read the next paragraph.
The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came, but soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamours, mostly those within myself, and so it had been ever since. How blind I had been.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. The real significance of my experience. Rob, do you have 121, the description? Yeah, let's take a look at that. This came from Pass It On, and it explains much better what happened in Winchester Cathedral. And that's what Bill is remembering now, the significance of what happened 30, well, 20 years ago, right? 1919, 29, 39. Yeah, 20 years ago. He said, what happened was electric. Suddenly, my room blazed with an incredible white light. I was seized with an ecstasy beyond description. Every joy I had known was pale by comparison. The light, the ecstasy. I was conscious of nothing else for a time. Then in my mind's eye, there was a mountain. I stood upon its summit where a great wind blew, a wind not of air, but of spirit. In great, clean strength, it blew right through me. Then came the blazing thought, you're a free man. I know not at all how long I remained in that state, but finally the light and the ecstasy subsided. I again saw the wall of my room. As I became more quiet, a great peace stole over me. This was accompanied by a sensation difficult to describe. I became acutely conscious of a presence which seemed like a veritable sea of living spirit. I lay on the shores of the new world. This, he thought, must be the great reality, the God of the preachers. Savoring my new world, I remained in this state for a long time. I seemed to be possessed by an absolute, and the curious conviction deepened that no matter how wrong things seemed to be, there could be no question of the ultimate rightness of God's universe. For the first time, I felt like I really belonged. I knew I was loved and could love in return. I thanked my God who had given me a glimpse of his absolute self, even though a pilgrim upon an uncertain highway, I needed be concerned no more, for I had glimpsed the great beyond. Bill Wilson had just celebrated his 39th birthday. He still had half of his life ahead of him. He always said that after that experience, he never again doubted the existence of God, and he never took another drink. You want to continue?
Sure. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens.
Bill, this is his last hospitalization. This is December 11th, roughly December 11th, 1934. If you want to know the details, he was admitted, his admission slip says 2:38 p.m. in the afternoon. Bill showed up at the doors of Towns Hospital. And on the way there, he had a few bottles of beer. That was his last. But what I want to draw your attention to is this last line on the last page, beginning to the next page. But soon the sense of his presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly those within myself. Emmett Fox said, problems are signposts on the way to God. And that's what Bill is experiencing here. Worldly clamors, everyday nonsense that drops on us. That's what Bill was talking about. Worldly clamors, mostly those within himself. How blind I had been. Okay.
So I read that at the hospital I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch. I have not had a drink since.
Let's go through this carefully. The first three lines, which are two sentences, is highlighted in pink. There I humbly offered myself to God. That's a prayer. As I then understood him, just whatever he knew at that moment, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. What step is that? 3. We've already taken 1. Previous page took 2. Willingness was all that was required. And here he is taking the 3rd step. 2 lines down, he says, I ruthlessly faced my sins. Please underline that and write step 4 next to it, because that's what that is. Step 3 was his concession. Step 4, he ruthlessly faced his sins. And then he said, I became willing to have my newfound friend. Notice friend is now capitalized. Previously in this chapter, when Bill used the word friend, more often than not, it was in lowercase, because he was talking about his friend, Ebby. When you see friend capitalized, he's talking about your friend and my friend and every one of us here. We have our own friend, our own conception of God. So, willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. Please underline, take them away, root and branch, and let's write steps 6 and 7. Now, bear in mind, they didn't have these steps numbered like this. Bill had Ebby come back and said, tell me once again that little formula you had. And that's what this comes down to. And I have not had a drink since. That date was 12/11. That's December 11, 1939. 34, rather. Bill was 39 years old. He never had another drink.
My schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. I made a list of people I had hurt and toward whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability.
Please highlight that whole paragraph. My schoolmate, now schoolmate again, lowercase, we're talking about his friend Ebby, visited me. Now you may want to circle visited me in blue highlighter, because one of the things we like to do in the workshop is highlight things by color, and we highlight approached references in blue. The same way we highlight prayers and promises in pink. We highlight musts in green. We highlight approach references in blue. And the last one is recovered references, or in orange. Now, I know that may sound silly, but trust me, when you're looking for the musts or the prayers in this book, it's a lot easier to just thumb right through the pages and look for the color. So you'll know I've found the must, I've found the prayers, etc. So he's saying his friend visited him. Ebby approached him. What did he do? Let's underline, I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies, and let's write step 5. Because that's what that became. And then, as Kathy said, we made a list of people I hurt. Let's circle the word hurt. Or toward whom I had felt resentment. Let's circle resentment. And next to that, I've written steps 4 and 8. Both steps. People I had hurt. Step 8. People I felt resentment. Step 4. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. In other words, steps 8 and 9.
I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking for direction. I beg your pardon, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure.
3 days sober. Let's keep that in mind. The date that Bill gave for this is the 14th. 3 days sober. Not after 90 meetings in 90 days, not after a year. He was 3 days sober. Let's go back to the first line, the new God consciousness within. Please underline God consciousness. And the next sentence threw me for a long time. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. What does that mean? Well, common sense, to me, is a way of saying my first thought. What's the first thing I think of? Me. Because that's common sense. If I don't think of me, who is going to think of me? And so what Bill is saying here is that common sense, that first thought, in other words, the old way of thinking now became the exceptional way of thinking. Thinking of others used to be an exception. Thinking of himself was primary, was common sense. So when he said common sense would then become uncommon sense, he's saying the first thought was going to be of me. That was going to be of you, not of me anymore. And the next sentence you may want to underline and highlight in pink. He said, I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as one he would have me. Step 11. He's telling us to work step 11. In other words, he's telling us the more and more we do for others, the less we do for ourselves. Let's continue with never was I to pray for myself, except to my request bore on my usefulness to others. Please underline usefulness to others, and let's write step 12, the charge. The second part of step 12 is the charge. The first part is a promise, spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, but nothing's free in this world. So we have a charge, we have a bill in the second part, which is usefulness to others, to give to others what we have been so freely given. And like as Kathy read, that would be in great measure 3 days sober. What were you thinking about 3 days sober? I don't think it was the same thing as Bill, but okay.
My friend promised me, I beg your pardon, my friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my creator, that I would have the elements, a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements.
Beautiful. Let's go back to the beginning and let's underline when these things were done. And you may want to circle that word done, not read, not discussed, not written about. This is a program of action. And when these things that he's just talked about in the previous few paragraphs, when they were done, not I wrote it down after Abby told me, and then I put it in my sock and I took it home and I read it one of the days when I was going to the bathroom. No, no. When these things were done, he would have a new relationship with his creator. Let's underline a new relationship with his creator. That's a promise, a challenge, if you will, of step 12. And that he would have this new relationship. And incidentally, above that, I've written spiritual awakening, because that's his new relationship with his creator. He has undergone a change of personality sufficient to recover from this hopeless state of mind and body. So he says, I had this new relationship with my creator, which would have, and please underline, elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. The steps. And it doesn't say which eliminated my drinking problem. It said eliminating all my problems. And then he said, belief in the power of God and enough, let's underline willingness, honesty, and humility. That's recognition of one's shortcomings. Recognition of one's shortcomings. To establish and maintain a new order of things. Please underline new order of things. That is another way, I believe, of saying the fourth dimension of existence. It is an indication of harmony, a new order of things. Our life is now in harmony. How do I know that? Well, we got right spiritually in steps 1, 2, and 3. We got right mentally with ourselves in 4, 5, 6, and 7. And we got right with the world and everyone in it, with our fellow man, within 8 and 9. And so as a result of doing that work, when that work was done, we have a new relationship with our Creator, a new order of things. We are now in harmony. In the past, Bill said, even in our best moments, were we not a producer of confusion and then harmony? Well, now that's the opposite. We produce harmony, not confusion. And the last two words should be circled in green. They're two musts. Essential means must, and requirement means must. So he's basically saying this new order of things were musts. Must be pretty important. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all.
That paragraph is all in pink. All of it. And we're saying simple but easy. Please underline a price had to be paid. What is that? Incidentally, had to should be circled in green because that's another way of saying must. A price must be paid. So, like I said, the first part of the 12th step, greatest promise we offer the newcomer, a spiritual awakening, a change in personality. But nothing in life is free. So we're being handed a bill. We're being charged with the responsibility in that second part that involves the destruction of self-centeredness. There's the price. When he said a price had to be paid, like any good salesman, he then tells you the price. Destruction of self-centeredness. I must, again, another must, turn in all things, not just his drinking, in all things, to the Father of light who presides over us all. Father of light, another reference to God, another euphemism for God. And I'm going to just add something here that I think, Kathy, I think you told me this. We've been using certain terms: selfish, self-seeking, self-centered. What's the difference? Well, Kathy taught me that selfish means it's all for me. How I act as if everything is for me. That's selfish. Self-seeking, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? Why should I do that? And self-centered, it's all about me. How I think of the world and how I think the world perceives me. It's all about me. I will go through it again. Selfish, it's all for me. How I act. Self-seeking, what's in it for me? Basically, why should I do it? What do I get out of it? And self-centered, it's all about me. And that's how I think. And that's how I think the world perceives me, that they're here to serve me. Everybody is here to worship at my feet. In this case, it would be King Bill of the Kingdom of Wilson. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Continuing on, these were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound.
Yeah. I'm going to suggest you highlight that whole paragraph in pink. Let's keep it easy. Okay. But he's saying from the first line, these are revolutionary, drastic proposals. They are not calling for minor modification of our behaviors. They're not. They're revolutionary and drastic. This is not about subtle change. Everything changes. But the moment that I fully accepted them, and you may want to underline fully accepted them, the effect was electric. And here's his description of the spiritual experience he had. And I like the description I gave you before. That's in Pass It On, page 121. That's the page I read before, which I think says it much better. But Bill said there was a sense of victory and peace, serenity, utter confidence, lifted up as though a great clean wind had come through. God comes to men gradually, spiritual awakenings. As we read or will read very shortly in the spiritual experience appendix, there's no difference between spiritual awakening and spiritual experience except the time element. One happened suddenly. Bill Wilson's white light moment. We're going to hear later about Fitzmayo's white light moment. I never had one of those. Most people I know had an experience, an awakening, a gradual awakening over a period of time. And that's what the second part of this means. He says it comes gradually. I'm sorry, I mean the first part. It comes gradually. That's a spiritual awakening. But he says impact on me was sudden, and above sudden, I've written spiritual experience. It was sudden and it was profound. Now, before we go on, I'm going to set the scene again. We're going to set the scene again. We don't, when it comes right down to it, we don't know exactly what happened to Bill on that day. We don't. We do know this. Here's the facts. This was December 1934. Bill died January 1971. And during those 37 years, he never found it necessary to take a drink again. Something very profound took place in Bill's life in that room on that day. And he always said that he had this spiritual experience as a result of the steps he took that day, earlier that day, with Ebby, during which the ideas, emotions, and attitudes which guided his whole life were cast aside. These major modifications, these drastic proposals, rather than minor modifications. That these things were all set aside and a whole new set of principles taken their place. And he was able to live the rest of his life without having to drink. Now, there are a lot of people who say that this was a result of some of the medications he was given, like the belladonna treatment. Well, for what it's worth, he wasn't given belladonna on this last visit. He was given belladonna on the other visits before that. So there was no belladonna involved in this. But let's take a look at who Bill Wilson was. He came into the hospital 3 days ago. Selfish, self-centered to the max. Bill did what he wanted when he wanted it. Remember, his wife had 3 ectopic pregnancies. She almost died. Bill visited her once in the hospital. That's the kind of guy Bill Wilson was. Selfish, self-centered to the max. He did what he wanted, and that was his attitude when he went in there. Let's now look at the attitude he had when he left there.
For a moment, I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still seeing. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you. I don't understand, but you'd better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who have such experiences. He knows they are real.
Here it is. Here it is. Hmm? Oh, yeah. Well, it's perfect time. Perfect timing. So again, we know what Bill was like when he came into the hospital. Let's take a look at what he was thinking when he left.
While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Perhaps I could help some of them. Then, I beg your pardon, they in turn might work with others.
This is Bill's vision. Bill's vision. We named a chapter after it later, A Vision for You. But this is what Bill had. This was his vision. That when he left, there were, and incidentally, above thousands, I've written millions. There's no longer thousands. There's millions of us, hopeless alcoholics. And I've even inserted 3 words after the word alcoholics. I wrote beyond human aid. That there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics beyond human aid who might be glad to have what had been so freely given me. Then I could help some of them. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. That was Bill Wilson's vision, an endless stream of alcoholics, one-on-one, helping others to stay sober. You want to know why they called him a visionary? Read that paragraph again. That was his vision. And he spelled it out in detail later on in the chapter called A Vision for You. And I think we're out of time.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, do anyone have any questions, any
Comments?
comments, anything want to add?
Howard, I'm Trey. I'm an alcoholic. That was fantastic. Thank you to both of you. It was awesome. Thank you, Rob. That was really awesome. On the sheet where it says the insert, okay, where we got to the four paragraphs, okay.
Right.
I love how you said that he acquiesced this to Ebby, okay, and that he didn't take the credit for this. On the page that's on there where it says insert number 1, and you mentioned that Hank Parkhurst was the one that said insert. Was it
Right.
Bill Wilson that actually wrote the 4 paragraphs, or was it Hank Parkhurst?
It was what in the office, Ruth Hock has always said that the basic editing of that book came down to the people who were in the office at Honors Dealerships, who was Bill Wilson, Hank Parkhurst, Ruth Hock, Fitz Mayo, and Jim Burwell. And Bill was always talking about this concept of a God of our own creation. Jim Burwell was an atheist. He didn't even want God mentioned in it. And he wound up getting credit by a lot of people for even coming up with this. But the fact is that Hank just wrote down the stuff that Bill was always talking about in the office.
I got
Like
it.
he was
Okay.
reminding him, hey, you forgot something, Bill.
All right. Yeah, That's great.
Remember,
Really
Hank's job was always to nudge Bill, finish that book, do this, do that. He gave him an outline for how to follow in the book. So of course he's going to say, Bill, wait, you forgot something.
Yeah,
And that's-
awesome. Thank you very much. That's great.
Anyone else? All right. Want to head out with, what do we do? The Lord's Prayer? You want to take us out?
Yeah,
Okay.
just take a moment's silence for those of us in the rooms and those out there that are struggling. Our
Father,
who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.